I never thought the sound that would break me would be my own phone buzzing at 11:47 p.m. In a town like ours, nothing ever really happens after 10. The diner closes, the streets go quiet, and everyone pretends they don't know everyone else's business. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, boots still on, staring at the same crack in the wall I'd stared at for years, when my girlfriend's name lit up my screen. Emily. We'd been together almost 3 years. Long enough that people had stopped asking if and started asking when. When I'd propose. When we'd move. When we'd become another predictable couple in a predictable town. But that night, Emily wasn't calling. She was texting. Can we talk tomorrow? It's important. Those 4 words hit harder than any fight we'd ever had. Important never meant good. Important meant something had already happened, and I was the last to know. I typed back sure and threw the phone onto the bed like it had burned me. That's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't announce itself. It leaks in slowly, like a gas you don't smell until you're already lightheaded. Looking back, the signs were everywhere. The late shifts that didn't add up. The sudden password on her phone. The way she'd turn the screen away when she laughed at messages that had nothing to do with me. But in that moment, all I felt was a tightness in my chest and a quiet, ugly thought I didn't want to name. Our town is the kind of place where memories stick to locations. The bar where we first kissed. The gas station where we had our worst fight. The park bench where she told me she loved me for the first time. I drove without thinking, ending up parked outside that same park, engine off, headlights cutting through the dark. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself I trusted her. I was wrong. The next morning, Emily sat across from me at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug she wasn't drinking from. She wouldn't look at me. That alone told me everything. It just happened, she said finally, voice thin. I didn't plan it. I remember nodding. Not because I understood, but because my body was on autopilot. She said his name like it was nothing. A guy I vaguely knew. A guy who had always smiled a little too easily when he saw us together. She cried. I didn't. That came later. I moved out that same day. Packed my clothes into trash bags like the cliché I'd always mocked. In a small town, breakups don't stay private. By the time I slept on my friend's couch that night, people already knew. What I didn't know, what I couldn't know yet, was that this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something far more complicated. And somewhere between the wreckage of that relationship and the quiet anger growing inside me, I was about to meet a woman who would change the rules of my life completely. The worst part about getting cheated on in a small town isn't the cheating itself. It's the echo. Everywhere I went, it followed me. The grocery store. The gym. The gas station on Main, where everyone pretends not to listen while listening to everything. People didn't ask what happened, but their eyes did. Some looked at me with pity. Others with curiosity. A few with that quiet satisfaction people get when someone else's life cracks open. I stayed on my friend Mark's couch for 2 weeks. Long enough for his girlfriend to start leaving passive-aggressive notes about temporary situations. I didn't blame her. I wasn't temporary emotionally. I was a mess with shoes by the door and silence that took up too much space. Emily didn't try to fix things. She sent one long message 3 days after I left. Something about confusion, mistakes, and finding herself. I didn't reply. Not because I was strong, but because I didn't trust myself to say anything that wouldn't haunt me later. At night, my mind replayed everything. Every moment that felt off. Every time I'd ignored my gut, because love made things easier that way. Anger came in waves, but underneath it was something worse, humiliation. I'd been loyal, predictable, safe, and somehow, that hadn't been enough. That's when I started going to O'Reilly's. It wasn't my kind of place. Dim lights, worn wooden floors, a jukebox that played songs nobody admitted to liking. But it was quiet in a way that felt honest. Nobody there cared about my breakup. I was just another guy nursing a beer and staring at nothing. The third night I went, she was already sitting at the bar. She didn't look like someone from our town. That was the first thing I noticed. Confident posture. Calm eyes. The kind of woman who didn't need to check her phone every 5 seconds. She was talking to the bartender like they'd known each other for years. I took the stool 2 seats away, ordered a beer, and kept to myself. You look like someone who's trying not to think, she said without turning her head. I almost laughed. Almost. Is it that obvious? I asked. She smiled slightly. It usually is. That was it. No flirting. No forced charm. Just an observation. She finally looked at me then, really looked, like she wasn't in a hurry to label me. Her name was Claire. She was 34. New to town, sort of. Renting a place on the edge of town after a divorce she didn't overshare about. She spoke carefully, like someone who'd learned the cost of saying too much too fast. We didn't talk about Emily. Not directly. I told her I was recently single. She nodded like she understood more than I'd said. We talked about the town, how it traps people, how it forgives some mistakes and never lets go of others. When I mentioned I'd lived there my whole life, she raised an eyebrow. That explains the look, she said. What look? The one that says you don't realize yet that this isn't the end of you. I didn't respond. I didn't know how. When I left that night, I felt something unfamiliar. Not hope, not relief, perspective. And I had no idea that this quiet, composed woman would soon be standing beside me while I finally faced the wreckage Emily left behind, and what I decided to do about it. I didn't plan on seeing Claire again. That's what I told myself, anyway. Small towns make promises like that meaningless. You don't run into people. You orbit them until gravity does the rest. A week passed, then another. My life settled into something quieter and heavier. Work, gym, late dinners alone, nights that stretched too long. Emily's name stopped hurting every time I heard it, which somehow felt worse. Like the wound was scabbing over without ever being cleaned. The third time I went to O'Reilly's, Claire was there again. Same seat, same calm presence, different book. She looked up, smiled once, and went back to reading like she'd expected me all along. I sat beside her this time. We didn't rush into anything. That was the strange part. There was no urgency, no need to impress. She didn't ask why my relationship ended. She didn't ask what I wanted next. She asked simpler things. Do you sleep well? What do you miss that you don't admit out loud? Questions that slid past my defenses without tripping alarms. I found myself answering honestly. About how I missed feeling chosen. About how silence at night felt louder than any argument. She listened, not like someone waiting to reply, but like someone filing information away carefully. One night, I asked her why she'd moved here. She paused, then said, I needed a place where no one knew the worst version of me. That was the moment I realized this wasn't a coincidence. We were two people hiding in plain sight, drawn together by damage we weren't ready to unpack. It took weeks before anything shifted. The first physical contact wasn't dramatic. No sparks, no fireworks, just her hand brushing mine when she laughed. But it stayed with me longer than it should have. Made me aware of how touch had become something I'd forgotten how to receive without expecting loss. She didn't rush me. She never crossed a line without making sure I wanted to step over it too. When we finally kissed, it wasn't about escaping loneliness. It was about choosing presence. It was controlled, deliberate, like we both understood that intensity didn't have to be loud to be real. Around town, people noticed. They always do. Emily noticed too. I saw her one afternoon at the grocery store. She froze when she saw me with Claire. Her eyes flicked between us, trying to measure something she couldn't name. Claire squeezed my arm gently, not possessively, reassuringly. That night, Emily messaged me for the first time since her apology. I heard you're seeing someone. I didn't reply. Claire didn't ask about it. But later, as we sat on her porch watching the sun sink behind the trees, she said quietly, people don't like it when they realize they're replaceable. That sentence lodged itself in my chest. I told her everything then. Not just the cheating, but how it made me feel small. How I'd started doubting my own worth. She listened, eyes steady. She didn't cheat because you lacked something, Claire said. She cheated because she did. That was the first time someone said it without trying to soften the truth. I didn't know it yet, but something was shifting. Not just in me. In the way Emily looked at her own reflection through the town's gossip. And Claire? She wasn't angry. She wasn't jealous. She was observant. And that made her dangerous in a way I hadn't yet understood. It's strange how quickly roles can reverse. For months, I'd been the one avoiding eye contact. The one taking longer routes through town just to skip familiar faces. Now, without trying, I was the one being watched. Emily started showing up in places she'd never cared about before. O'Reilly's, for one. She'd sit at the far end of the bar, nursing a drink she'd barely touched, eyes drifting toward me, and Claire like she was watching a movie she didn't like but couldn't turn off. Claire noticed everything. She's not over it, she said one night, voice neutral. You don't know that, I replied, though part of me already did. Claire smiled slightly. I don't need to. I've been her before. That sentence should have worried me. Instead, it made me curious. Claire never spoke badly about Emily. She didn't need to. She understood something I was only beginning to grasp, that regret often disguises itself as concern, and jealousy loves to dress up as nostalgia. The town started talking. Nothing direct, just little things. A friend mentioning Emily looked not great. A coworker casually asking how long Claire was staying in town. I didn't realize how much power perception had until I wasn't on the losing side of it. One evening, Emily cornered me outside the diner. "I didn't think you'd move on so fast," she said, eyes flicking toward Claire, who was waiting inside. I laughed once. Not out of humor, disbelief. "You moved on before we ended," I said. "This is just me catching up." She flinched. "I made a mistake," Emily said. "You didn't have to replace me with someone like that." That's when Claire appeared beside me. "Like what?" she asked calmly. "Older, confident, untouchable." Emily stammered something about timing, about things being complicated. Claire listened, then said softly, "Actions don't get complicated. Excuses do." Emily walked away in tears. That night, Claire poured us both a drink and sat across from me, studying my face. "You don't want revenge," she said. "You want balance." I didn't argue. She explained it simply. In small towns, reputation is currency. People remember stories longer than facts. Emily had written a version where she was confused and brave, where I was distant and predictable. "We're not going to lie," Claire said. "We're just going to stop protecting her version." I should have stopped her. I didn't. Over the next few weeks, things shifted. Claire didn't post anything, didn't confront anyone. She just told the truth, calmly, selectively, when asked. About how we met, about the timing, about the cheating, without venom. The town filled in the rest. Emily started unraveling publicly, oversharing, defending herself when no one accused her. Her new relationship didn't last long once people started connecting dots. One night, Emily sent me a long message. Paragraphs of regret, anger, blame, love. Claire read it without comment, then handed my phone back. "You don't owe her silence," she said. "But you don't owe her forgiveness either." I didn't reply, because for the first time, I realized something unsettling. This wasn't revenge driven by rage. It was consequence. And Claire? She wasn't teaching me how to hurt someone. She was teaching me how to stop being hurt by them. By the time I understood what Claire was really doing, it was already working. She never pushed, never suggested anything that sounded cruel or desperate. Everything she did was subtle, almost boring, which is why it was effective. In a town that fed on drama, restraint became its own kind of spectacle. Emily, on the other hand, burned loudly. She started posting things online. Vague quotes about betrayal and growth. Photos meant to prove she was thriving. Everyone saw through it. The town always does eventually. Confidence doesn't need witnesses. One afternoon, I ran into Emily's sister at the hardware store. She hugged me awkwardly and said, "I'm sorry about everything." That was when I knew the narrative had fully shifted. Claire and I were never affectionate in public beyond what felt natural. No overcompensating. No performance. She understood something I didn't, that the absence of defensiveness is disarming. You don't have to destroy someone, she told me. You just have to stop shielding them from who they are. The real turning point came at the town fundraiser. It was one of those events everyone attends because not attending says more than showing up. Emily arrived late, alone. Claire and I were already there, talking to people, laughing quietly. We didn't seek attention, but it found us anyway. Someone asked how we met. Claire answered honestly, calmly, with timing that felt almost surgical. Emily overheard. I watched her expression change, confusion, then panic, then something close to realization. She left early. Later that night, my phone rang. "Emily." I let it go to voicemail. Her message wasn't angry. It was desperate. "I feel like I'm disappearing," she said. "Like everyone's chosen you." Claire listened to the message with me. "They didn't choose," she said. "They just stopped pretending." That was the moment I felt the last thread of guilt snap. Not because Emily was hurting, but because I realized her pain didn't come from loss. It came from accountability. Claire and I grew closer, not through chaos, but through calm. Our relationship stayed grounded. Passion was there, but it never felt like a weapon. It felt like a choice. She didn't need me to be younger. I didn't need her to be older. We met in the middle, experience and vulnerability balancing each other out. One night, I asked her why she was so good at this. She hesitated, then said, I learned the hard way that being reactive hands power to the wrong people. I believed her. Emily moved out of town a month later. No announcement. No goodbye. Just gone. The town moved on. So did I, but not in the way I expected. I didn't feel victorious. I felt aligned, like my life had stopped tilting in someone else's favor. Claire didn't celebrate. She poured us a drink and said, closure doesn't feel loud. It feels quiet. She was right. And in that quiet, something real had room to grow. After Emily left town, life didn't suddenly become perfect. That's not how healing works. There was no dramatic sunrise moment where everything felt new. Instead, things softened. Edges dulled. Mornings felt less heavy. I stopped bracing myself for reminders that no longer existed. Claire stayed. That was the part one hadn't expected. At first, I assumed she'd leave once the tension burned out, once the story resolved itself. But she didn't treat our relationship like a chapter. She treated it like something still being written. We fell into routines. Sunday mornings at the diner. Evening walks past houses that all looked the same. Quiet nights where conversation mattered more than distraction. She challenged me in ways Emily never had, not emotionally, but intellectually. She asked what I wanted my life to look like, not who I wanted it to be with. You're young, she said one night. That doesn't mean you're unfinished. I started thinking beyond survival. About leaving town. About staying. About choosing rather than reacting. The age difference faded into irrelevance. If anything, it grounded me. Claire wasn't trying to mold me. She respected the version of me that existed now, not the potential she could shape. That scared me more than any fight ever had. One evening, we ran into Emily's old friend group at a restaurant. The energy was awkward but polite. Nobody mentioned the past. They didn't need to. Claire squeezed my hand under the table. You're not invisible anymore, she whispered. I realized she was right. The betrayal had stripped me down, but it also forced me to rebuild without pretense. I stopped defining myself by who hurt me. I started defining myself by who I chose. Claire told me about her divorce eventually. Not details, just lessons. About choosing partners for comfort instead of compatibility. About outgrowing people and mistaking it for failure. You didn't lose anything, she said. You outgrew it faster than you realized. The passion between us deepened, but it never felt reckless. It was intentional, safe, strong, like fire contained in a hearth instead of a wildfire. That was when I understood something important. This wasn't a rebound. It was a recalibration. Emily became a story people stopped telling. Her absence became normal. The town found new things to gossip about. But I carried the lesson forward. Pain doesn't always demand revenge. Sometimes it demands evolution. Claire didn't rescue me. She didn't orchestrate my life. She simply stood beside me while I learned how to stand differently. One night, as we sat on her porch, I asked, do you think this would have worked if I hadn't been hurt first? She smiled. No, she said honestly. But that doesn't make it less real. That answer stayed with me. Because maybe some relationships aren't meant to save you. They're meant to meet you after you survive yourself. Power is a strange thing. I didn't feel powerful when Emily cheated on me. I felt small, replaceable, like something essential had been proven wrong about me. But looking back, that was never about her actions alone. It was about how much of my identity I'd handed over without realizing it. Claire saw that before I did. You let her decide your value, she said once, not unkindly. That's not love. That's outsourcing self-worth. That sentence hit harder than the cheating ever had. I started noticing how often I'd apologized in my past relationship. For moods, for needs, for existing too loudly or not enough. With Claire, there was no scoreboard. No constant negotiation of emotional space. That shift changed me. At work, I stopped shrinking. I spoke up, asked for things I'd always assumed were out of reach. The world didn't collapse. People listened. One afternoon, I ran into Emily by chance. She was visiting town. Briefly, passing through. She looked different. Not worse, just quieter. Like someone who'd lost the audience they'd been performing for. We talked. Not about us. Not really. About the weather. About how small the town still felt. She mentioned therapy. Growth. Moving on. I wished her well. And meant it. That's when I realized the revenge had already ended. Not because she left, but because she no longer mattered in the way she once had. Claire watched from a distance, never intervening. How did it feel? She asked later. Uneventful, I said. She smiled. That's the goal. We talked about the age gap that night, about how the town saw it, about assumptions, about timelines people expect you to follow. Do you feel behind? She asked. No, I said after thinking. I feel awake. She nodded. Then you're exactly where you need to be. We weren't perfect. We argued. We misread each other sometimes. But there was no fear underneath it. No power struggle. No need to win. That was new. I understood then that revenge hadn't been about hurting Emily. It had been about reclaiming authorship over my life. Claire didn't pull strings. She handed me the pen. There's a difference between forgetting something and releasing it. For a long time, I thought healing meant erasing Emily from my memory, pretending those years hadn't shaped me. Claire helped me see how wrong that was. You don't have to pretend it didn't matter, she said. You just don't have to live there anymore. That idea settled slowly. I stopped telling the story as something that happened to me and started telling it as something I'd moved through. That shift changed how people responded and how I did. The town noticed, not in a dramatic way, just in the way conversations softened, in how people stopped lowering their voices when I walked by. I wasn't the guy who got cheated on anymore. I was just me. Claire and I talked about the future more openly then. Not promises. Possibilities. She didn't push for permanence. She didn't avoid it either. We don't need to decide everything now, she said. But we should be honest about what we want. I wanted growth. Space. Depth. Something real. So did she. That scared me more than heartbreak ever had. One evening, we visited the park where Emily had once told me she loved me. I hadn't planned it. We just ended up there, sitting on the same bench. I told Claire the story. She listened without tension, without comparison. That version of you deserved love, she said when I finished. So does this one. I realized then that jealousy hadn't existed between us because competition hadn't. Claire didn't measure herself against Emily. She didn't need to. That kind of security was contagious. The town fundraiser happened again that year. New faces. New stories. I stood in the same room where everything had once felt heavy and felt nothing but calm. Emily wasn't there. I didn't look for her. Claire leaned in and said, "You look different." How? Unburdened. That word stayed with me. Later that night, she asked if I'd ever leave the town. Maybe, I said, but not to escape it. She smiled. Good. We weren't bound by revenge anymore, or even by the story that brought us together. We were bound by choice, and that felt stronger than any promise I'd made before. When people ask how I changed, I never know where to start. Do I tell them about the betrayal? About the nights I couldn't sleep, replaying conversations and wondering how I'd missed what was right in front of me? Or do I tell them about what came after? The quieter transformation that didn't announce itself with pain, but with clarity? Claire says change is only obvious in hindsight. She's right. I stopped chasing validation. That was the first thing. I didn't need people to reassure me that I was enough. I didn't need to be chosen to feel worthy. I chose myself, and somehow, that made everything else line up. Our relationship deepened in ways that surprised me. Not because it became louder or more dramatic, but because it became steadier. We trusted each other's silences. We allowed space without fear that distance meant abandonment. One night, I asked her if she ever worried I'd regret being with someone older. She didn't answer immediately. No, she said finally. Because you're not here to be led. You're here because you want to be. That mattered more than she knew. The town started feeling smaller in a different way. Not suffocating, just familiar. I no longer felt defined by its opinions. Emily's story had dissolved into background noise. Occasionally, someone would mention her name, but it landed without weight. She'd moved on. So had I. But moving on didn't mean forgetting the lesson. I learned how easily love can turn into complacency. How trust requires attention, not assumption. How pain, when examined instead of avoided, becomes information. Claire never framed herself as the reason I healed. You did the work, she reminded me whenever I drifted toward gratitude that bordered on dependence. She refused to be my replacement identity. That was love, I realized. One evening, sitting on her porch again, I admitted something I hadn't said out loud before. If she hadn't cheated, I said, I don't think I'd be this version of myself. Claire nodded. Growth rarely asks permission. We didn't glorify the past. We respected it for what it taught and let it stay there. I started planning my next steps, not out of escape, but intention. Career changes. Possibilities beyond the town. Claire supported all of it, even the paths that didn't guarantee we'd stay in the same place forever. Love that limits isn't love, she said. That sentence rewired something in me. For the first time, I understood that revenge hadn't been the point. Control hadn't been the point. Even closure hadn't been the point. Becoming someone I respected was. And everything else, the betrayal, the age gap, the town, the consequences, had simply been the terrain. I never imagined victory could feel like this. No fireworks. No gloating. No rush of adrenaline. Just quiet. The kind that seeps into your bones and tells you, finally, that you've come out the other side intact. That the person staring back in the mirror is someone who survived betrayal, shame, and doubt, and didn't just survive, but learned to live differently. Claire and I had a rhythm now. Not perfect, not immune to friction, but steady. Trust and curiosity guided us more than fear or insecurity. Our connection wasn't about needing to fix each other. It was about choosing to be present together. The town noticed, in its own subtle way. People spoke differently around me. Less pity, less quiet judgment. Emily's absence no longer echoed. She had moved on, leaving behind whispers that faded quickly, like a song whose melody is remembered only in fragments. One evening, we walked past the diner where I first met Claire. I paused outside, taking in the empty lot and the quiet hum of the streetlights. She noticed my pause and slipped her hand into mine without asking. "You're thinking about the past again," she said softly. "Just how far I've come," I admitted. "I never thought I'd feel this way, steady, at peace." She squeezed my hand. "You earned it." And maybe that was the hardest lesson of all. No one else could hand it to me. Not revenge, not gossip, not a dramatic confrontation. I had to claim it myself. All Claire did was walk beside me while I realized it. We spent that night on her porch, watching the stars blink over the small town. Conversation drifted between work, memories, and plans that didn't need timelines. We didn't need to fill the silence with noise. It was enough to exist together. I thought about Emily briefly, not with anger, not with longing, but as part of the landscape that shaped me. Betrayal had been a storm. Claire had been the calm that followed. And in that calm, I'd learned how to rebuild, not on someone else's terms, but on my own. "You know," Claire said, leaning back in her chair, "some people chase revenge and never feel satisfied. You didn't." I smiled, thinking about it. She was right. Nothing I had done had been about hurting her. Everything had been about finding balance, reclaiming my life, and refusing to be defined by someone else's choices. For the first time in a long while, I slept without a tight knot in my chest. I woke without dreading the day. I looked at Claire and knew that this, quiet, steady, intentional, was real. It wasn't the flashy ending movies promise. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a public reckoning. It was the victory that comes from growth, self-respect, and mutual understanding. And as the small town carried on its routines, as the streetlights flickered and the nights stretched quietly into morning, I realized something I wouldn't have believed months ago. Life doesn't need drama to be powerful. Sometimes, the strongest stories are the ones that unfold quietly, with lessons learned, hearts healed, and love that chooses you back. That night, sitting there with Claire, I understood the truth fully. Betrayal had started my story, but I had finished it on my own terms, calm, steady, and finally free.